Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Britton's Hangout Hour, episode 72. I'm here with Sochi, uh, Sochi Azuh. I'm sorry, I'm very white, but how are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. I'm good, Britton. I'm fine.
I actually found you from Epic's channel, and I found your channel, and you have some interesting stuff over there.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
yeah, how are you doing today? How are you doing today?
I'm good. We had it was rainy earlier today, but the sun just came out, as you can see. Happy about that. Unfortunately, it's too late to take the kids out for a walk, so we're all holding um, and here I am enjoying this conversation.
Very good. But yeah, you have a BookTube channel. You also have a website. You showed me the other day. That was pretty cool. So like, what is it that you do?
My 9 to 5, or what do I do on those platforms?
Well, either or.
Okay. So my 9 to 5, I'm a communication specialist, which means I get paid to tell stories. Um, then when I'm not working, I read and share my thoughts on books and writers or bookish topics with a community that I'm so happy to be a part of. And as you are aware, we have the community thing going on Discord with great people like Epic, D, and you know, keeping the flame burning as we read along or body read great works of fantasy, sci-fi, and whatnot.
Well, I guess a good question to start out with is like what intrigued you to speculative fiction? You know, science fiction, fantasy, horror, well, supernatural horror.
Yeah, yeah,
Like what
yeah.
intrigued you to that genre in particular?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with the kind of person I am, which is being quite reflective, and books had always been my go-to as a resource or a place of respite or escape from reality. Place of resource being a place where I go to learn more about the situations I'm in. And so I basically read everything. I had been reading just about anything and everything. But my taste has gotten a little bit more mature, more refined, I would say. And I think in recent years, I've kind of been taken by great works of fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd really like to give a shout out to one of Nigeria's greats, Lola Shunai. She's a great writer. You can look her up. She is a curator of Ake Festival in Nigeria. She's a writer. One of her best works, um, Baba Segi's Wives. I can give you a link to that. And one meeting I had with her, she recommended a few authors,
Mm.
some that I was familiar with, and some that I wasn't familiar with. One of them being, I think, John Ivanovich. If you read Rivers of London,
Oh, I've heard of it. I have a friend who really likes that series.
yeah. So I read. She pointed me to Rivers of London. I read that one and I was blown away. I was like, wow, this is great. It was a great exploration of different mythologies, and one of them being an extract of African mythology. One of the gods, I think it was one of the mermaids in the Thames, who was more or less an a derivative of one or two African or Nigerian gods or goddesses rather. And I was really taken by. I was like, wow, it was really inspiring to see how someone could take something as that we would maybe think of as mundane, or and then turn it into something really inspirational, something really intriguing. And from that one book, she pointed me to a few others. Naomi Alderman, I think, Her Own Power. She recommended that too. When I finished reading a few of these recommendations, I was like, yeah, yeah, there's no going back from here. And since then, I sought out different works. I had already been introduced to Neil Gaiman, or I already knew of Neil Gaiman, knew of Tolkien, I knew of C.S. Lewis, but actively looking for works of fantasy and also learning that this is what attracts you to that genre, which is really that there's a certain way that fantasy, either to the writer or to the reader,
Mm-hmm.
actually draws from lived experiences, or true experiences, or the reality, and makes it into a work that is not being assessed in the same way as could be when you're reading any other genre,
Mm.
because they I would like to say teach first. They teach in a very different way. They touch on realities or on subjects, tackles those subjects in a very different way, in a way that really digs deep,
Mm.
deeper, I would say, or I would dare to say, deeper than could be in any other genre or by any other genre. And I think since then, knowing this, I believe in this as well, has kind of buttressed and strengthened my belief that if you're really looking for a way to learn about the realities of life, or the realities of values, our norms, um, our philosophy as humans, there are deep truths that are being spoken and shared in works of fiction or speculative fiction, that you can't find in any other genre. So
Oh yeah, it's I definitely agree with you. I mean, I remember you mentioned the Dark Star trilogy. What it will be a trilogy. Once Marlon James puts out the third book, but I read Black Leopard, Red Wolf a few years ago because I was because I mean I'm always looking for things that are different in fantasy. I mean, as much as I enjoy the old fashioned quest, to go find the ring or the magic sword or whatever it is. I like, and I mean, I'll be fair. Black Leopard, Red Wolf is a quest book, so I mean, it's not too different.
love it, love
Um,
it.
the balloons. Um, it's kind of funny because like I'll admit I'm hardly an expert on African mythology, but I knew enough about I knew a little bit enough about it from when I was in school. Because for some reason my teacher, I was in elementary, and my teachers taught us about like fables, and they taught us about a little bit about African mythology, like Ananzi and stuff like that. And she mentioned that they would, well, there's a lot of trickster gods in African mythology, and a lot of the time when you hear a story from those same trickster gods, a lot of that narrative gets thrown into question. And Marlon James in Black Leopard, Red Wolf, anyway, I'm going to read Moon Witch Spider King sometime this year. Um, really leans into that, and I thought it was really fascinating. So like, it was kind of like, yes, that finally came in handy.
I don't think we talk enough about the service that Marlon James actually, gives, does rather, to the genre and to the community, community of speculative fiction readers and
Mm.
reviewers, or even writers as well. Um, Anansi is part of
I mean, I'm hardly an expert. I just know a little bit just from what I was just telling you.
That you read it, that
Uh,
you read it, and
uh,
you could actually you could pick up one or two gods and their nuance, or their persona,
mhm.
is you've gone further than most, trust me. But Anansi
And it,
is.
I mean, it kind of made me think like how underrepresented, that is in fantasy. I'm like, I was kind of
Oh
like
yeah.
when I finished Black Leopard Red Wolf, I'm like, damn, I want to see more of that.
Yeah.
I want to see something more like that.
Yeah. We're still telling Marlon, we're still asking Marlon James. Anybody who knows Marlon James, please ask him, when can we get book three?
I'm really looking forward to book two. I really am. I'm excited.
You haven't read it yet.
No, I've only read the first one.
Ah, all right. I won't spoil it for you. I won't spoil it for you, but um, I'll just say, and I've, also seen, at some point, I was really like, okay, beginning of this year, a lot of booktubers were going on about books that they're looking forward to.
Hmm.
Nobody has mentioned anything about looking forward to Marlon James book three.
I definitely am. I mean, I bought. I'm telling you, I bought Moonwitch Spider King like right when it came out. Though it was the hardcover, so I'm like, oh, okay. And then the
Oh,
paperback came out, and I was like, dang it. So I got the paperback. I ended up giving my hardback to a local bookshop that I like, and they're gonna sell it. So should be good. But
I was
man, I really
maybe
enjoyed Black Leopard Red
later
Wolf.
in the year. I'll probably buy, because I don't have a personal copy.
You don't have a personal copy, okay?
I don't have a personal copy, but I plan to buy all of the hard copies for the two books, and hopefully, when if I don't anticipate we'll get book three this year. That's my thought, but my thinking. But once that final installment comes out, I'll try to make sure that I have all three on my bookshelf for a reread every few years, or every 2 years or something.
Yeah, I've
'Cause I
been
really,
meaning
I
to
really,
reread Black Leopard Red Wolf because I mean I hadn't gotten around to it because there's been a lot of other books I've been reading. I'm sure you know how that is.
yes, I do. Yes, I do. I actually listen to it on audio.
Oh yeah, I've
Um,
heard some of it on audio. It's really good. That narrator's really good.
yeah, except for maybe book two, and I thought they murdered a few pronunciation of names.
Mm.
But it
Oh.
happens, I guess. I guess it happens. I heard it happens. But I couldn't read it or listen to it with my kids, unfortunately,
Oh
because they have
yeah.
wait.
I
So
imagine not.
if
It's
any of your listeners or viewers, are thinking of reading, listening to the audio, um, just be warned. Just be warned.
yeah. I mean yeah, it's a graphic book. I'll put it that way.
Yeah,
At least Black Leopard Red Wolf. I mean, I'm sure Moonwitch Spider King is not very forgiving either. I mean, you read it,
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. But that's awesome. I'm really glad you enjoyed it.
I mean, I won't pretend it was the easiest read in the world, but once you kind of, I find when I at least I found when I read it aloud, it kind of came more.
Yes, yes. I think the reason for that is, unlike, and I think I stand to be corrected, but unlike Western literature, most African, and this is one of the takers, one of the things you learn from Malan James' Dark Star trilogy, is that some books are just meant to be read aloud,
Mm-hmm.
and this stems from the oral tradition
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah.
African storytelling,
Yeah, I've
which is
seen a few
that,
interviews where he's talked about this of him
yeah,
talking
it's
about
not
it.
meant to be it's not meant to be internalized. It's meant to be read out, and that is why when you read it out, even better. It's even better because you get a good sense of the intonations, inflections, the tonality itself is musical, and and you can feel the aggression of the aggression, determination, the you can feel the humanity in the voices of the characters, in their thoughts. You feel their passion, or their pain. It's just no other way. And I think that this is why I said, Malanje did a great job with it, because that is just almost the only way you can enjoy that book. If not for the sake of being polite to people and not being reading it out loud, where regardless of where you are, it's really something that you should enjoy, and you can enjoy reading out loud or being read to. And it's just such a great book. I think it's one of those great books that read as bedtime stories. Only that it's really graphic.
I was about to say, yeah, I
And
don't know if I'd read that to my kids. It gets a bit,
nope.
especially the were hyena scene.
Yes. Ooh.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of gore, so no, it's the other way, and the profanity is, But anyway,
I might wait till my kids are a little bigger
yeah,
before I read
yeah,
it or
yeah.
something like
It's
that.
one
I
of
don't
those
know.
things you just package and say, you gotta read this one. Now that you're old enough.
Yeah, I'll just throw it at them and be like, "Yo, read this." I'm like, "What is this?" It's like, "Just do it." Yeah, I don't know about
But do you
that.
have any other book? Do you have book recommendations that kind of follow? If so, it's like if you've read Marlon, you should read so and so and so.
I mean, uh, I read a book called The Vor a few years ago, or actually no, that wasn't a few years ago. It was last year. I read The Vor. It's also it's not really an African story. Um it's kind of a how do I even describe The Vor? I did a review of it. If you want to watch it later, see my
I'll check it
thoughts
out.
on it. But
Who is it by?
what it's about? Well, it's
No,
kind
who is
of
the author?
the author. He's called Brian Catling, though he also goes by B Catling, or that's what it said.
Okay.
Here, let me grab it real quick. Looks like this. So there you go.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, nice. Looks nice cover.
Yes, it's a apparently it's an Edward Muybridge photograph, which he's actually mentioned in the story. Apple. Um, it's kind of sprawling, but I thought it was very fascinating. It's also based in Africa, though it's kind of a deconstruction of that kind of colonial mystic Africa.
Yeah,
Um, there's
interesting.
references to like Heart of Darkness in it, and other things. There's this big forest that's called the Vor, and I thought it was quite fascinating.
I just added it to my Goodreads. And it's a trilogy, the Vor trilogy. So
Mm-hmm.
you read book one then?
I've only read book one. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I'm thinking about reading book two. I'm not sure yet when I'm gonna do that. Um, but um, but I liked it a lot. Um,
And I see you got it forward from Alan Moore.
yes, that's actually what attracted me to that book because he's one of my favorite writers. So,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
um,
Alan Moore is a master.
indeed, he is. He's yeah.
And he's deep. He's really deep.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I have his book Jerusalem right here. I'm still afraid of cracking it open. I'm like, oh man, I
Oh
don't
my
know what
god.
weird postmodern stuff he's gonna bring up.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but yeah, it's I enjoyed that book. I thought it was really fascinating. It was funny reading Black Leopard, Red Wolf. I mean, this is a really different book, but I was reminded of Perdido Street Station, and just in terms of just the huge scope of the imagination on the page. I thought was very similar, though.
Yeah.
I don't think they're anything alike. I mean, Perdido Street Station's kind of a take on Victorian England,
Hmm.
except it's a alternate world. Um, well, Black Leopard Red Wolf is like a mist is like a mystical
Yep.
alternate Africa.
Yeah. 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 Um, I think for me, if I were to maybe offer a recommendation, it would be maybe be the Palm Wine Drinkard,
Mm.
Amos Tutuola,
Who's it by?
Amos Tutuola. I just the Palm Wine Drinkard.
Oh, I just heard you type. Where'd you send it to?
Yeah, chat. So just check Palm Wine Drinkard. So
Oh, okay.
it's Yeah. So it's a work of it's one of the first he's one of the first novelists or published novelists from West Africa. And
Oh, okay.
it was quite interesting that the premise of that novel was a popular a palm wine drinker who embarks on a journey. There's so you have elements of the forbidden forest demons, um other fabular entities.
Sounds freaky.
um
I think I'll like it.
yes. Yes. So it has,
AKA, I'll love it.
yeah. So so it has, and it's a quick read. You can read it, but you have to be warned. The language is not so, and there were reasons, or people kind of speculated on why it doesn't read as. I mean, the language doesn't read as what's it called, proper English.
mm.
So sometimes
So is it in
runs of
like?
words.
So is it like in like patois or well, that's Jamaican. That's not.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it like that?
It has elements of that. So we call it pidgin, but
Pigeon.
other
Okay.
than that, yeah. But other than that, there have been speculations about why the language would be, I mean, was the way it was, or why the language is the way it is, and how it maybe progresses, pushes the story further and further. But one of the common elements or the common denominators between Melon James and Amos Tutola would probably be the magic realism. So while they may be have those characteristics of fantasy or fantastical, or these speculative, the ratio of magical elements seems to actually be distinguishing factor. So, but I think you would enjoy Amos Ochola. Is a quick read, very very slim. It's not a novella. It's a quick read, but quite interesting in the sense that the way that he melds the real world as we know it, or the world as we see it, and the otherworldly,
Mm.
and then of course the magic being the binding force. And it's the same way that Marlon James employs the elements of the magical and the real, and how one a central character actually traverses those two worlds. So I think he draws a lot from those mythologies, which also you would also find in Amos Tutola's work. And in this way, Marlon actually pays, I would say, a the integrity of the research that he did
Mm.
is just top notch. So for me, I think they are a good match. If this then that, for
I
this
mean,
if this then that.
I also read Things Fall Apart when I was in school. I don't know if you've read that, but
Yes.
I didn't really care for that one because I mean I know the tragic hero. I know what the author was trying to do with kind of the tragic
Mhm.
hero,
Yeah.
and it's sort of a Greek tragedy, but I just didn't feel bad for the guy. I'm sorry to say,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, no, completely valid. I mean,
which I
there's
mean,
never any single reaction to a character.
he's all like, oh, see, he works hard, so he's not all that bad. And I'm like, he's beating his children and
Yeah,
murdered another one.
yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
sorry. It might be a
yeah,
culture thing. I don't know.
yeah. It's not necessarily. I mean, just like you said, especially in response to Greek literature. In Greek literature, it's not uncommon to find, parents killing their children either in sacrifice to a greater calling, sacrifice to God, in sacrifice to a
Oh yeah, he
cause.
does it even though he was told not to. Do not join
Exactly,
in on it. Like
exactly.
it's bad
And
juju.
yeah,
But
well,
he's so
and
insecure about his masculinity, he does it. You're just like, dude.
yeah,
Oh.
yeah, 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 yeah. But again, there are actions, and then there are consequences. So
Well, of
you
course, yeah, I get
you could
that.
interpret you could interpret his suicide to the gods taking back their yeah, not pulling one over you, but coming to demand their pound of flesh
Yeah,
for
I should note his adoptive other son, who he
yeah.
actually likes for I don't know.
Yes, and everybody did. I mean, everybody does. Everybody who reads, you just love the dynamics between the father and the son. You love the dynamics between the father and the daughter. You love the dynamics between the father and his family. I mean, this is Okonkwo who, I mean,
I guess my issue
it's,
was like I don't mean to interrupt you, but I guess like
yeah, sure, sure.
it was kind of like I don't know if you've read The Crucible, but like John Proctor, not a nice guy, but there was still that sense that he wants to improve in some way. I never really
Yeah.
felt that.
Hmm.
And maybe that's part of the point of why he's supposed to be a tragedy because like he's so stubborn in his I'm not gonna be like my dad. I'm gonna be
Yeah,
a manly man
yeah,
and
yeah,
brr,
yeah.
and
And I believe that's Atomilo, right? That's Atomilo Miller.
yes,
Yeah,
Arthur Miller.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? As a theme that and a theme and as a mirror to real life, where as individuals we become the thing that we say, the thing that we are striving so much to not be like,
Mm,
right? And this again stems from the Oedipal complex. I mean, the story of Oedipus,
mm-hmm.
where he ends up marrying his mother and killing his father,
Mm-hmm.
whereas he tried all his life to run away from this same thing, and you come back to that same thing. So I mean, the way that it becomes an archetype for humanity, or in an individual, from an individual lens, that individually we try so much in our lives to not be like this one thing, or this one person, or this community, not be like them. But then again, in playing out those steps that we fashioned, or we've carved to run away from
Mm-hmm.
the origin, we end up becoming another origin, a replica of that same origin. So it's quite interesting, and I think one of the things that makes us appreciate these individual works that explore these themes is really in the way that, as storytellers, they individually, in their individual talents, try and fashion these build these worlds around the stories, and make us pull us in to enjoy the telling.
Yeah, I remember I liked the prose style of
Yep.
Things Fall Apart. So
Oh yeah.
it's not like it's one of those books I go back and forth on. It's kind of like oh well, I can't think of one at the moment, but it's one of those books I just kind of go back and forth on. Like, he's kind of a dick, but like that's kind of the point, and I don't really like it. But you're not supposed to like. I can't make up my mind. One of those I can't make up my mind about.
Well, if you like, who is it now? You've read
I think it's Achibe is the guy's name. I couldn't think of his name at
Yes,
first, but that's his name.
Chinua Achebe. Um, I would like to say, if you like, I don't know if you read any, if you've read any Chimamanda Adichie.
I don't believe I have.
Okay, so Half of a Yellow Sun, um, or Americana, or Purple Hibiscus, um, The Thing Around Your Neck. Those are titles that she's written, and her first novel, when she wrote it, The Purple Hibiscus, she was acclaimed to be the second Achebe, and basically for the reason that she wrote a lot like him, and this was not something that she sought out to do intentionally, to look like or to sound like
So it's
someone
called
else.
Purple Harvest Gods.
Hibiscus, the flower.
Oh, it's a flower. Okay,
Yeah,
my bad.
hibiscus. Yeah.
I misheard you.
So in terms of stylistics, Achebe was one of a kind, and his style was quite not bare, but it was stripped. It was minimalist. Um, he didn't use long-winded sentences.
Mm,
He stripped words to their barest minimum to have the maximum effect, and he also infused a lot of Igbo, which is a tribe in Nigeria,
mm-hmm.
Igbo proverbs to drive home a point in a way that English as a language could not deliver. And I think it's in that simplicity he was able to weave great paragraphs and great stories that had that still maintained some lyricism. They still read like poems, while still pushing or driving the story further, paragraph or sentence by sentence. And this was one of the great beauties of his work. And and when especially he has a story with a strong premise, it was just an icing on the cake.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Yeah. Oh, neat. Yeah. I found that book you were talking about. Purple Hibiscus should be. I'll add that to my list after this is over.
Yeah, you could read some of our short stories on the New Yorker websites. I think they're still up. Really interesting stories.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Achibe wrote a critical essay of this book, but Heart of Darkness I really enjoy as well, even though there might be some of it that we'll say hasn't aged well. But I think its message is really, I think, is still ages very well about kind of
Mhm.
the hypocrisy of colonialism and how, I think, or at least my interpretation of it, I could be
Yeah.
wrong always, but like the savagery or evil, as I like to think, is inside everybody. It's not just like the idea that the white people are, inherently like more civilized or is nonsense. Or that's what I took from it. I think it's a
Mm.
message that
Yeah.
still holds up, but I know there's people who've had problems with that, and I think there is some racism in it. It's not it's about colonialism, so that's kind of a given. I
Hey,
don't
who
think
do
it's
you have
meant to.
there?
I don't think that's meant to be a good thing, though.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
he had lessons. He spoke from a place of um or from a sense of responsibility to tell a story um the way it was true to us as Africans, shining a light on the effect of colonialism again, and how it was being received, how it came to be, how it was being received, and also more also shining a light on cultures that were misrepresented in canon works. So we had a lot of visitors, I would say, visitors to Africa
Mm-hmm.
who went back to tell stories about Africa that were not true.
Mm-hmm.
And those works were being held as Bibles, um, Bibles of, that told stories of how, this how African cultures are, or this is how Africa is, which not were not true.
Mm-hmm.
So he came from a sense, he wrote from a sense of responsibility to tell the stories of these cultures or our cultures in the way that they were and the way that they are.
Are you talking about
And
are you talking about Conrad here or Achibe?
um, Achebe wrote in response to Conrad's Heart of Darkness,
Yes.
more or less. Yeah, but there were other works. There were other works, and of course, Achebe wasn't the only one who, at that time, was beginning to write the great and post-colonial literature for, in response to all these sorts of works. Conrad wasn't only the only one.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, recently I just read a biography of, I think I still have it here, by Byron Farrell, a biography of Richard Burton.
Mm.
He was a translator of um, is it Perfume Garden, some literatures from Middle East, and then travel writings from Central Africa, Central West, Central and West Africa. So he was well traveled, and he wrote all these things. And these works um, were sold or distributed before 1950s, 1960s, 1940s, 1950s, 50s, 60s. And he was well traveled. And he's still being considered as one of the most interesting men, that have lived. He fenced. He understood many languages. He was well traveled, and you can understand why such a person would be, you know, held up as a figure to it not just emulate but also to listen to. And that was one of the dangers of pulpit authorities, which is that because they traveled so far and so wide, you would believe anything that they say. However, he actually perpetuated stories of Africa that were not true. I think he wrote in some of his literatures, or even encouraged some very racist writings.
Mm.
He was also, very, very bad husband as well. He believed in polygamy. He didn't understand why a man would be faithful to one woman. But that's another story anyway. But what I'm trying to get at is, during this period, a lot of people, not just Conrad, were telling stories about Africa that were not simply not true. And Achebe was just one of the many blacks who stood up and took to the pen and paper to tell stories of Africa as it was and as it is, to cancel out those untruths.
Yeah, it's interesting with like heart. I mean, I haven't read a lot of like I admittedly haven't read a lot of. I mean, I've read a lot of African American literature.
Mhm.
You know, like I've read James Baldwin. I love Giovanni's Room. I think it's a great book. Marlon James, as I mentioned earlier. I've only read Black Leopard, Red Wolf, but I want to read more from him. I read Kindred by Octavia Butler last year, or not? Actually, no, it was 2 months ago. Which is a fantastic book. Um, but I guess what's interesting for me about like Heart of Darkness is there's that. It's kind of like how you mentioned. There's this. It's not fantastical, but there's that like surrealism. Or at least it
Yeah.
felt like that to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
No, no, you're right. You're right. You're
I
right.
mean,
You're
I
right.
know you have a very, I know you probably have a very different perspective from me since, you're
Not
actually,
not too far from what you said. In fact, I think I alluded to that in the beginning when I said the different textures of the different ratios of the magical in a work could contribute to what category it falls under. But then again, they're all They're all speculative, not necessarily speculative per se, but especially when you say surreal, because if you talk about the surreal, what who comes to mind is
It's like
Garcia
reading it
Garcia
kind of feels
Marquez.
like I like when you get sick and you have like those really weird, vivid dreams.
Dreams. Yeah, that's surreal. That's surreal. So when something is doesn't look too real, right?
Uh huh.
And then it becomes, so it's not speculative anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's not speculative. Surreal is surreal. I hope, if somebody comes at me in your comments, that'd be great. We can have a conversation. I really love that. But when something's surreal, it's not speculative anymore. However, the speculative can have elements of the surreal. Do you understand what I'm saying? So,
I think so.
uh,
I mean, it's it's kind of interesting. I mean, you could argue. I mean, if
yeah,
you
I
wanted, that
guess
Heart of Darkness is sort of a proto magical realism in some ways, though. There's not though. I would argue there's nothing in that story that's like utterly fantastical.
exactly,
It's just
exactly.
kind of, and one could argue it's kind of playing into the mystical Africa stereotypes and whatnot. But I whatever it might be, I think what he did do, I like books. I'll put it this way: I like books where the setting feels like a character in and of itself, and
Yeah, yeah,
I think that's something like fantasy is very good at when it's done really well. Is
yes,
the setting
yes,
feels so vivid, it feels like you're there.
yep, yep. I mean, that's the whole idea of world
And even in
building,
other
isn't it?
fiction too, not just fantasy. But
Oh yeah, sure, sure. But I think it comes out really strong in fantasy. It's a very strong element in fantasy, especially because it's tied, in most cases anyway. It's tied to a
mm-hmm.
magic system that draws, or that needs a background to play in, or to play on, or play against. It's who. Okay, so let's say who. Let me ask you a question. Okay,
Okay.
let me put it this way. Yeah. Um, who would you say does or writes a better or more realistic or more tangible um, world, for you or to you?
Oh, I thought you were gonna mention like magic. I was about to be like, well, it's
Well,
not
they're
really
two
my
different things, aren't they?
forte. As that's not something I'm sadly not Brandon Sanderson. I'm not someone who really thinks that way. But world, well, I mean, we mentioned Marlon James. I think he is a very I mean, very similarly to Conrad, I mean, he goes a step further. Like you can feel like what it's feeling like walking, and I imagine them as jungles because I don't. I mean, I imagine that's what it is. But you're there, like you are there. You're feeling it. You can feel the sweat. You can smell it. I mean, that's um, Tolkien, of course. You
Yeah,
can. I think he was very good at that. I mean, then again, he spent like years working on it, so that probably is why it was in his head a lot. Um, China Mieville, I think, does it very well, particularly in Perdido Street Station and the Scar. I think is really good. Um,
Speaking of which, I just got China, the city by China
that's a
recently.
good one. Yeah, that was actually my first one. I'm actually hoping to reread it soon. I have it
Yeah,
over there.
yeah,
But yeah, he's a really good writer. Um, Well, he's a good writer when he really puts his mind to it. He has written some stuff I haven't
yeah,
really clicked
yeah.
with. But man, that dude can world build like it's nobody's business though. And I mean, I could mention George R. R. Martin or something like that. I do like his I do enjoy Westeros a lot. Um aside from yeah, I mean there's others I could mention, but
Yeah,
yeah, that's probably the
yeah,
main ones that
yeah,
pop to my mind.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I could say like Neil Gaiman, but Gaiman writes mostly in our world. It's just the magical, like
Exactly.
American Gods is my favorite fantasy novel. At least
Hmm.
right now, it's always susceptible to change, but it is based in America and on real places, so you're just
Yeah.
kind of like, oh well.
Mhm. Or yeah, or even England in some cases. But but you can see that in varying degrees of strength, each of these writers, while they write, world build, or they build their worlds really convincingly, their magic systems are not, they're not the same degree necessarily.
Well,
They're not.
sure, yeah.
You understand? So
I
two
mean,
different.
I think
Yeah.
there's differences in the magic. Like, I mean, with
Yeah.
James, it's more, it's based on mysticism. I would say it's more like, again, not an expert. I'm just going off what I do know.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of the similar thing in the Vor. It's just kind of mystical,
Yeah. Yeah.
ancient rituals type of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Shamanism, I would say.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and Mieville's more scientific,
Yep.
not in the way like not in the way that not in the way like Sanderson is, but he's actually one of the few I could say who actually does magic as science is a really interesting
Yeah.
idea.
Yep. 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 Yep.
It made me realize like you could actually do that concept very well,
Yep.
because
I agree.
generally I kind of scoff at the idea of magic as another form of
Yeah.
science.
Yeah. Yep. Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. And it's quite interesting that you bring up China, because that's one of the things that I sense in his writing. I think he's more or less, he leans very well towards science fiction.
Well, yeah, there's definitely science fiction aspects in
And
his work. He really loves to blend genres, which when you get to the city in the city, you'll see.
yeah. Uh, Sorry, my trail of thoughts. Hold on, please.
Oh, well, that was a interesting time. All right,
Sorry,
you're
sorry
back.
about that.
No,
Yeah.
you're good. Um,
Yeah, life is happening.
yeah, no,
Um,
it's I guess it's what's yeah. I mean, if you want to go like science fiction, he did write Embassy Town, which I'll admit I didn't take to, but I'm thinking about reading it again at some point because it was one of those I don't know if I was in the right headspace when I was reading it. That happens.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, he's good. And what I was saying was, you'll see when you start his work, he loves to blend genres a lot. He's not he's not.
Yeah, yeah, but it's always interesting to see how. I mean, I mean, fantasy is great. Fantasy is deep. So you can just imagine if we were talking about the general fiction,
Mm-hmm.
mm, you would rely more on a writer's understanding of the human psyche. And not to
Mm-hmm.
say that in fantasy they don't do that, but they rely on many other elements that a writer of general fiction might not feel the need to use. Um, so I could be wrong, of course, but this is how dearly I hold works of, or how dearly I hold works of fiction. I'm sorry, fantasy and science fiction to my heart, because I believe that they feel a need, a responsibility to actually use these other elements to a heightened degree than they would if they were writing a work of general fiction. Of course, there are some writers, maybe Gothic fantasy. Sorry, yeah, Gothic, not Gothic literature,
Mm-hmm.
which relies on um, you know descriptions on, or the elements of architecture,
Mm-hmm.
landscape. Those are valid, in order to
Atmosphere,
push
and
a
I hear
story
what you're
forward.
saying.
Yeah, in order to push a story forward, but they still anchor the story's premise, or the story progress, on a human psyche, which is the state of a mind, and the state of a character's values or norms, in order to complete or create a well-rounded story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I mean, I guess that's what I like about fantasy is that it's not. It's like you're in another world. Well, okay, yeah, that might sound a little silly to some people. It's like, yeah, it's in another world. But it's kind of why I like history too, because it kind of feels like you're in a different world in some
Yeah,
ways,
nice, nice,
and
nice.
that's why I like fantasy a lot. I remember Dr. Philip Chase called it the I think he called it the literature of reconciliation. If Philip watches this, he can correct me. But I mean, I don't know.
I enjoyed your interview with Philip. I mean, for a long time I've been following him, and I am really happy that he finally got his books out. And I even more happy that you even got a chance to speak with him. It was great. It was great and just fun. Watching the both of you riff off works. I love Phil.
Yeah, he's a nice dude, man, and the Way of a Dam was a good book. I mean, it
I
dealt.
haven't read it. I hope I get a chance to read
I'm
to
kind
get the
of
books this year.
kind of surprised it didn't get taken up by somebody because it was very polished. And that's not to take away from self pub. I've read a couple of self pub books and I really have enjoyed them. But I
And
think
he's very learned. Did you know he consulted on a movie? Um,
Philip did.
yeah, he consulted on a movie. They consulted him for the accuracy of a Viking, details of Viking culture
Really,
that was not used in the movie.
really, I did not know that. He never brought that. Maybe he mentioned it on his channel. I never heard of that. That's cool. I'll have
Yeah,
to ask him about
he's
that.
just cool. I love love his work.
Yeah, we've had a couple of conversations. He's a nice guy, and I was very lucky to get him when I did because we're because he's very busy.
Yeah,
Popularity means you're gonna be busy a lot, and also he teaches, so you're just like, oh yeah, it's
yeah,
But he's always
yeah.
interesting to talk to. But I really enjoyed his book. The way I think I would recommend it if you like Lord of the Rings or old classic legends like Beowulf or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I read Beowulf in high school, so I liked it. I did ask him about his main character's name, Day Raven. Apparently, it's in Beowulf. He gets bear hugged by Beowulf,
I
literally
think
to
he tried.
death.
Yeah, he tried. Was that him? Yes, I think it was. He in one of his videos he tried to give some kind of breakdown of Beowulf. I could check. I could check. I could be mixing him up with another podcaster who did some deep dive into Beowulf, but never really understood it. There is a book. There is a book about.
Have you read the Heaney version or have you read Beowulf? Have you read like the Heaney version or
Yeah, I haven't read Beowulf
no?
actually.
Okay.
I keep passing it up at the bookshop where I frequent.
Mm.
I probably should and make a resolution to read it. Um, but I haven't. I haven't gotten to it. It's very paradoxical, isn't it? I mean, the monster is not a monster. I don't know.
What do you mean?
Like, so it's about a mother of a dragon seeking revenge on another, the person who kills his her son.
Yeah,
Correct me.
that's like the second part. There's like three parts. There's
Okay.
Beowulf when he's younger and he fights Grendel, who's like this just abomination. He kill or he does that. Then he fights Grendel's mother, who's his
Mhm.
mom, and she's also you know, and then he fights a dragon when he's an old man. So there you go.
Okay.
They
Yeah.
they never explain why. It's just that there's a dragon for some reason. But yeah, it's good. I mean, I've only read the Heaney version, which
Okay.
it's pretty good. I read it in high school. I've heard J.R.R. Tolkien did a version of it. I haven't read that, and they also put out a very recent version of it. I haven't read that either, but I've heard it's good. I think Philip actually talked to the guy who did the most recent one.
Yes, I remember now. Yes, I remember now. It was the Legendarium podcast.
Oh yeah, yeah, I've heard of those guys. Aren't they like one of the Tolkien people? Like, don't they? Or
Yes,
well, that's
yes, they do.
Legendarium. That's the name of Tolkien's mythos. So yeah, that was
Yeah,
dumb.
they do these deep dives into works of fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I do recall. I think it was they had Phil on it once, and they did
Well, I
something.
imagine. I know he's a great
Yeah, I
admirer
remember
of
now.
Lord of the
Yes.
Rings.
Yeah, 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 yeah. You're right. You're right.
I need to reread Lord of the Rings at some point because it's been a long time. I read it when I was in like middle school, and it's funny. I was rereading bits of Game of Thrones the other day, the Song of Ice and Fire books, and I'm like, God, I forgot a lot. Like, there's so much stuff in here I forgot about. Like,
Yeah,
it's really
yeah,
good. I'm like, dang it.
yeah. But you don't beat yourself up about it. I think I'm coming to that. I'm
I'm
kind
sure
of
that's happened to you. I mean, you're.
yeah. It does. I mean, there are books
I
that
bet
you
you're
could
reading it and
just
you're like, wow, I forgot all about that.
exactly. So just do a reread. It's not hard. It's
I'm
part of the process actually. You're not really reading it if you're reading it once.
That's true. Yeah, I know. I need to like Black Leopard, Red Wolf. I wanted, or actually, I was rereading through it because I was doing some work on a website about with Black Leopard, Red Wolf, so I kind of reread through it again. Um, uh, but yeah, no, it's definitely a there's so many books to reread too. like
I
yeah,
remember.
I just finished The Crossing by Cormac McCarthy.
Oh, nice.
Like 2 weeks ago, maybe.
For the
I'm like,
second time.
no, it was for the first time, but it's one of those I'm gonna read again though. So it's on my, I threw that on the reread list. So
I think he's too sad for me. I don't know. It's strange. I enjoy watching dark or reading and watching dark works, but I mean, for some reason I can't. McCarthy is on another level. I can't. I don't know if I can stomach.
yeah, no, he's not for everyone. I mean, he doesn't even use like proper punctuation in his work, so
Mm.
I can see that driving people off. It's like he's one of those like if you don't like him, it's one of those like I don't blame you. He
Yeah,
you know he is not meant for everyone.
you're not selling him. You're not selling him well enough. Come on, or hard enough. Come on. I
Oh
want.
well, if you want me to sell, I think he's a very singular stylist, and
Yeah.
I think his stories are how I mean they're very dark, but they're also uh, moral. There's a lot of like tragedy in his work, and I think the way he does it, like and there's also this like again kind of like what I was mentioning with Conrad earlier. There's this kind of weird surrealism in his work that I can't describe. Especially in something like Blood Meridian or
Yeah.
very immense imagery is what I was trying to say.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean give him a shot if you if you want. But yeah, he's
Yeah. I actually
you
have.
have to be in a particular mood to read him though. It's not
I have one. I have one. Yeah, I have all the pretty horses by McCarthy sitting on my pile here. It's a nice cover. So I
That's
guess
actually one of his lighter ones.
yeah,
It's actually I mean, I wouldn't call it a happy book, but there's like, you know, it's not too difficult to read. It's
awesome.
more like adventurous.
All right.
So and there's even humor in it. That's actually pretty funny. So I'm like, "Oh, okay."
That's a good thing. So I chose the right one.
Yeah, no, I actually read All the Pretty Horses last year. And I'm like, yeah, it's pretty good, And then
Uh,
I don't know if you've had any of these reads, but it's like that read you were like, yeah, that was good, and then it just sticks in your mind, and you're like, wow, that was really good.
oh, right. Yeah, sure. I'll I'll give it a try. I'll give it a try. At least, if not anything, just to see this weird way he writes. Um, but I do like the idea, his idea of literature as a tool to really kind of open up a can of um, our minds and how we relate with each other or deal with our dark sides. And yeah, sure, I'll definitely be giving him a try very soon.
Yeah, and I mean, people wrestling with their dark side kind of fascinates me. So I mean, there you go. I mean, that's why I like Game of Thrones so much. There's chock full of that
Oh my,
in the
yeah,
Song of Ice and Fire books, anyway,
yeah,
and the
yeah.
show before it kind of.
Hmm.
Eh. Even that in Tolkien too, believe it or not. I mean, with the ring, it's just more.
I find the difference between Tolkien and as much as he influences a lot of these writers, but in the way that they've deviated, not deviated, but in the way that they carve more like a niche or their own trajectories from how Tolkien tackles his subject matters. He's more hopeful.
Yeah,
He's more hopeful. So it's you you go into a Tolkien book or a Tolkien story knowing that there is hope. You know.
yeah. I mean, I think Tolkien's view is that we can overcome the hurdles,
Yeah.
but like at a great cost, because there's a Bookborn actually made a video the other day. I was actually gonna make I might do a video about this very subject because it's kind of interesting to me. But she was talking about how that sometimes a lot of the nuance, like the initial points that the original work was making, kind of gets lost over time because like people kind of look at the real shiny stuff that like those big moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
Game of Thrones isn't just about Ned getting his head chopped off. There's like, I mean, spoilers. I mean, if you haven't read Game of Thrones, I don't know what to tell you. But
Yeah.
like there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
Same thing with a lot of people think of Lord of the Rings as like, oh, they're in the Shire and they're just skipping around, and it's like, oh no, there's a lot of dark stuff in the
Yes.
series.
Yes. It's funny you should mention that. I think even perhaps Epic might have also hinted at that as well in one of his videos. That even the movies has this is why we say the book is always better. Um, the
Depends on
movie
which
is,
one.
yeah, it kind of glosses over a lot of dark um context, a lot of dark backgrounds, or the darkness in Tolkien's books or stories. If you've read Erin and um he has a prelude to the Hobbit's Lord of the Rings.
Are you talking about like the
Um,
Cimmerillion
this
or?
No, no, no. After Cimmerillion, there's another one. This one was the love story between a fairy and
Oh, is it the like unfinished novel that his son put out? I think I know what you're
yes,
talking about.
yes,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I haven't
yes.
read that one.
There was a lot of darkness in that one. There was a lot of darkness in that one, and without people, if you haven't read that, you would think everything is all sunshine and roses
I
in
mean,
his
at the end of the book,
about his
like
books.
Frodo goes off to I forget exactly where he goes off to. Like he goes on more.
Into the east, to the east.
He goes to the east because he's so like he feels like a stranger in his own home
Yep.
because of what we would call now PTSD.
Yep. Oh yeah. So Exactly. Exactly. I mean,
Now,
it's not
in the movies, I mean, I do love the Peter Jackson films. Don't get me wrong; they're
definitely.
probably the best adaptation we're gonna get of the Lord of the
Yep.
Rings. I mean, there are the stuff they cut out, but they basically cut out a lot of the weird kind of asides, like Tom Bombadil and the songs, and they're basically like, okay, here's the story, there you go. But yeah, at the end of the movie, it kind of is just like Frodo just gets kind of bored and leaves. Like it's not really like um which is a little unfortunate because man, they could have. Though I mean they are very long movies, so I don't know what Peter Jam, but again, I don't mean any disrespect towards anyone who made those movies. They're great films, but yeah, I like in the book though how it's more like I need to figure out it's more like Frodo, like they win, but
Mhm.
there's a cost to it.
Yes.
There's still
I think
there's this it's like again you're coming back from a war. How are you gonna or you were in this really high pressure situation, and then you come back and you
for a
don't.
very long time.
Yeah, and
For a long,
you just don't feel like you're there anymore.
yeah, 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 yeah. And drawing from you know, so man, I mean, how there are so many ways to go. There's so many ways to look at it. So many, and I think that was one of the challenges that Peter Jackson had. You have so much background to these stories
I mean, they called it
that
unfilmable for so many years. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, that's why.
yeah. I
Like,
mean, it was a burden. It was a burden that he bore, which is, I mean, there was so much background, and you can just imagine that even up to today, they're still working on a few of these manuscripts that are still, either unfinished or um, that could be interpreted in different ways. And when you have so much background, there's so many ways that a single story could go with or without that context. And I think that was the burden that Peter Jackson had, which was, any of these details in the background for any of the character stories that could have pointed them in any direction. And, he had to make one direction. And I think, in fairness to him, he did a great job. But,
I mean,
at some cost.
I mean, again, I just have to mention, with what all they, with all the hurdles they had and how many people said this is unfilmable, they
Yeah,
actually did a really good job.
they did. Yeah.
They're all
Yeah.
great films. It's, I
It's
mean,
one
there
of the
aren't
few
just,
movies that I can rewatch over and over without feeling,
but
you
like
know,
you said, you got to cut some stuff out, and sometimes it gets kind of lost. I mean, that's not really, I don't blame them for that, but sometimes that happens.
moral of the story, guys, read the book. Read the book.
Yes, that would. I mean, it's kind of funny. I was talking to a friend of mine, Ben. He runs a YouTube channel called Bengus Khan, and we were talking about Lord of the Rings, and I was just kind of we were just talking, and I was like, there's all these beautiful things in not Game of Thrones, in Lord of the Rings that kind of gets lost nowadays. And he's like, oh yeah, I feel that, man. You're really making me want to reread it again. And then
Oh yeah.
I checked like his Goodreads. He gave like Fellowship of the Rings like 1 star. I'm like, dude, like what happened? He's like, I wasn't prepared for it. Okay, I'm sorry. Is yeah, you know how that
I,
goes.
I actually got this from a thrift shop. Um,
Oh wow, yeah.
and one of the reasons I got it was he had this essay. He had the essay Tree and Elf.
Mm,
The Tree and Elf is quite a is you know it's is a definitive essay about the motivations, the reasons why, and the responsibility of the function of a writer um, of fantasy,
mm,
and what it means to him, in writing fantasy. And of course, we had more or less the nuggets for the stories of the hobbits and the characters in Lord of the Rings, where we have He has one story, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil.
I've only read
Um,
on fairy stories from the like in terms of essays from Gerard. I've only read on fairy stories, which is a really fascinating read if you're interested in
I'll
fantasy
check it out.
scholarship.
Yeah.
Um, um, it's kind of funny because I was it's funny. I was talking to Owen Edwards yesterday about J.R.R. Tolkien if he were alive today. I'm like, I can tell you right now, I don't think he would like the majority of fantasy content being written today, because I mean, how do I put this? I mean, I'll just put it this way. He was kind of a snob in some ways. He really loved his classic mythology, and
Yeah.
he really loved like, oh man,
Yes, yes,
he's very particular.
he is. Sorry, he was. And there is if you're interested, you check out. Although it does have it has sorry, let me back up. Um, Holly Ordway.
Holly Otway.
Yes, Dr. Holly Ordway. I think of the Augustine's Institute. Recently did a biography. So what she called it is a spiritual biography of J.R. Tolkien.
Oh, so it's like a okay, yeah. I mean, I haven't read
Yeah.
a.
So
I think I saw a Tolkien biography not too long ago.
yeah. So if you're inclined, and depending on what you want to take out of it, it has a spiritual bent. But I think one of the things I took out of Holly Ordway's work, or writings of J.R. Tolkien's work, or his life rather, is that it's quite ironic, because as much as he was a snob of certain works, he was in touch with those works. So in order for you to actually snub something, you must have
Yeah, that's true.
engaged you
it's
must have engaged with it
I
to
mean
some level.
I mean
Yeah.
I often compare. I don't know if you've heard of Harold Bloom, but I often compare Tolkien to Harold
Yes.
Bloom.
Yes.
Both brilliant men at what they did. Snobbish though, very like they very particular about what they liked, and
Yeah.
if they didn't
Uh,
like it, they were gonna let you know.
yeah. I actually have a copy of Bloom's Genius. If you've read that one, the book.
I've not.
It's a collection of stories, writings about the different different personalities whom he deemed were genius or genii. And he himself was one. He was. I think he has one of those guys that had photographic memories or something. He was a genius in himself, and quite critical. He was quite critical.
Mm.
But I love. I I think why what I really liked about him was more or less his interest in the reasons why he was in the things that kind of like substantiated why he was critical
Mm.
about certain things or certain people, certain works. And one of them was his respect and his dedication to um, certain works that he thought were not just critical but exemplary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he kind of like tried to uphold those standards. Unfortunately, I think his academic career was also something of interest to people in that time. I think he had one or two scandals, and also, but as a writer, I really respect his work.
Yeah, I agree. I think he was because he's not with us anymore.
Yeah, he's
Um,
late.
I think he definitely was. I mean, he definitely influenced how I read for sure. I mean, do I always agree with him? No, but I don't think. I mean, if you're agreeing with people all the time, that might be a problem. But I'm kind of, admittedly, I'm also kind of a nerd when it comes to influences and in another life I could have been a good detective because I really loved to go like, okay, how did this guy? Because I've said this before. I mean, I don't know if you've watched any of my content or what. I don't know how much of my content you've seen, but I've often noted that like literature is kind of like a conversation, and I've noticed this not just in like regular old fiction, but there's also in fantasy. You see it in fantasy and science fiction and horror as well. Like how um, what's a good example? Martin for George R. R. Martin was responding to Tolkien, and Tolkien was responding to, this, and like uh, Byron and William Blake were responding to Milton,
Yep.
stuff like that. I'm really
Yep.
fascinated in that
Yep.
stuff.
Yep. 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 I think it's
And
quite.
Harold Bloom really touched on a lot of that, and that's kind of
Yeah.
what I find interesting about it. He did that in The Anxiety of Influence. It's really,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
find it quite fascinating. I don't know about you, but
Yeah. Not just fascinating. It's true. I mean,
hmm
that, I mean, what's really I mean, your work. I mean, writers don't. I mean, writing is solitary, right? It's a
hmm
solitary occupation. However, it's not in silo, right? It's always in response to something.
hmm
In response to something. And I think one of the or some of the most critical works in regardless of genre have been responses.
hmm
They have been responses to a trend. It's, you could call it something like a crucible moment for those writers and in those times. um, but it's always been in response to something, in response to a situation, in response to a writer or a work. I mean, think about any writing. I mean, even Shakespeare, his plays, they are either.
Yeah, definitely. Like Shakespeare, he was responding to like Machiavelli,
Yeah, yeah,
I mean that might be a stretch there, but I
yeah,
remember I
or even powers that be, authorities.
Plutarch.
Yeah. So I mean, we could draw the same conclusions about almost any work that comes to your mind. I mean, who is it in response to? On the group we're reading on the Discord, we're reading Tad Williams,
hmm
and
I've
yeah,
always wanted
and
to try him. I know he was a big inspiration for George R. R. Martin.
exactly. So it's and in being a response to something, you actually elicit other responses too.
Mm.
And then the cycle continues. So I agree with you. I mean, you're really spot on there.
Yeah, it's just that's just something that's. I mean, I learned about it when I was in high school, and it's just something that's fascinated me ever since. It's just kind of, and again, I think Harold Bloom really touched on that a lot
Yeah,
in
yeah,
his work. Um, uh, but yeah, I think that's a really fascinating conversation,
definitely.
and it's kind of hard for me to put in the words because it's so complicated. Like I can make a whole video about that,
You should. You probably
I
should.
probably should. I might get some other people on, but I've talked about it even with like Philip Chase, and I just like that. It really makes literature come to life for me.
Yep. Yep. I mean, even this conversation we're having right now um, is on another level. And I like to tell people that when you go to YouTube, it's there are universes.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's so great we have the internet now because like I
Yeah.
can sit here and we can talk about, and I can just like
Mhm.
the science fiction writers back then, they really called it.
Yeah. 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 And even pulp fiction. I know it was also in response to there's this booktuber who the librarian. He has a very deep voice.
Oh, are you talking about Library Ladder? Yeah, I've seen some of his videos.
Yeah. he has very, very cinematic videos, but very deep dives into the trends that that brought about great works that we know. And I really appreciate the work that most of these booktubers. I mean, they're really quite inspiring.
Yeah, and I think with the internet, it makes that conversation. I think it makes that conversation easier to have because like back then you'd have to go to like a university or something. I don't know. I'm just
Yeah.
making this up here. Or you'd have to be like or well, I mean, I don't think you have to, but like, I'm sure there were people who were just interested who went and saw like Harold Bloom speak or something.
Yeah, 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 yeah. All
Um,
those lectures that they have in universities and invite to symposiums.
and I guess like it's easier now since we have the internet
Yeah,
to have those
yeah, I
conversations.
agree. I agree.
It's one of the beauties of the internet, as much
Yep,
as we complain about it.
yep.
So
The
I
part.
guess I haven't really asked you this. Like, what are some books that you enjoy a lot that you've? I mean, I see you've covered some stuff, but on your channel. But what are some like books you enjoy? Which I
Um,
know that's probably like opening up another can of worms.
Not necessarily. I'll keep it simple. um, so yeah, definitely fantasy. But I still go back once in a while. I still pick up, the old, general fiction, horror. Um, Once in a while, I do read. Fewer times I read science fiction.
Mm,
But it'd be difficult for you to find me reading non-fiction DIYs. Definitely not. How not to. I don't.
I see you have nonfiction November on here.
Yes, I
And
did.
I,
So those are in some way they read. They don't read as, yeah, they are non-fiction, but they revolve around literature,
oh,
storytelling.
well,
Uh,
I know
yeah,
what you mean though. It's kind of harder to cover nonfiction because I can't just go, oh, that feels unrealistic. Oh wait, that happened.
yeah,
Oh, I
yeah.
hated the ending or something like that. You can't do that when you're in
No.
nonfiction.
But if I find books, the books that come about by journalistic efforts, I try to pick up those to just to learn more about history,
Hmm.
or background to a certain ideology, or I haven't read philosophy. I have read from philosophers, but I haven't read philosophy. I don't think I'm there yet.
It's always
But
a fun worm. It's always a fun can to open when you
yeah,
get there. Which
um,
also there's a similar conversation there. I mean, it's all over the place. I mean,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's in in all honesty, I think it's in. I wouldn't be shocked if it's in every thing. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if certain scientists were responding to other scientists, or if.
I think they do.
I mean, I
I
am
think they
hardly
do.
a science expert here,
And I
but
think I think you'll find, especially in philosophy, it's always in response, always and definitely, and it's very, very clear. There are no fine prints here. It's always very clear in the body of the work that this is in response to XYZ. Britton said this, but I really believe that Britton was right here, but he was wrong here,
yeah,
and
exactly.
this is why I think.
And like, I mean, you see it in poetry, and I mean, you even see it in comic books. I mean, I've
Yep.
seen it in
Oh yeah.
comics. Like it's everywhere. I'm sure
Yeah.
in many professions there's a bunch of that. But um, I'm sure in nonfiction books there's. Well, we were just talking about philosophy, so there you go.
Hmm.
But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was just kind of.
No, no,
I
no,
think
no,
you were kind
no.
of feeding into that point a little bit.
Yeah, I so very little or no philosophy. If I do encounter nonfiction, it's always still around books. It's still about around topics around books. Literary history, history of literature, maybe even philosophy of literature. If there's, but But I think a genre that I think I would hold dear in nonfiction would be spirituality.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So again,
I
like
think
I
you'll
said,
like Way of Edan then, because it also deals a
yeah,
lot with
because of my reflective
spirituality.
personality, I do devour works of spirituality. So yeah.
You may like Way of Edan then, because it also deals a lot with that.
Hmm.
Um, I'm also quite interested in well, I mean, religion, but also spirituality as well, because
Yeah, I wouldn't, and this is why I think it's good to just to draw the distinction between religion and spirituality
mm-hmm, yeah.
and even philosophy. They are all related, connected, but not necessarily the same thing.
Well, yeah,
You know,
I would agree with that. I'm not trying to, I probably should have been more specific there, but I know they're
it's fun.
often linked together. So,
Yeah, sure, sure.
um, I even see you've even had some conversations like building bridges between cultures with Lorraine Peters. I
Yes,
haven't
that
watched that,
was.
but like, what was that about? That seems interesting.
Yeah, it's so it's a part of the project I started. I haven't made up my mind how I want to progress it as a podcast, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of like thought about how we have people who lead using storytelling, and Lauren Peters was one of my guests, one of those I had encountered who is a community leader, and she uses stories to actually bring people together. So I'm an immigrant to Canada, um, and it's always refreshing to meet someone who takes your hands and shows you the ropes and shows you around, helps you to connect, helps you to settle in, helps you to succeed in a new environment, in a new community. And she is a great leader. But quite interestingly, she does this by using stories, helping people to understand cultures, and then just definitely just emphasizing how these stories help different cultures to connect, understand each other, and help each other to um, build an inclusive community.
Mm. That's interesting. It was one of my goals a few years ago. Actually, it was actually when I read Black Leopard Wolf. I was trying to read more fantasy and science fiction, horror. Speculative fiction in general. From people of different cultures, because I always like to try and expand my horizons.
Yeah,
Um, I'll admit I didn't do a very good job at it. I got kind of
always have a second chance.
I had a just stuff came up that year, but I did read Black Leopard Red Wolf, and I'm always curious about that, and I'm always thinking like, man, I'm sure there's a lot of cultures with weird, wacky ideas that they could throw into a fantasy novel. And
Yep.
that's one of the things I'm glad to see recently. I think has been a good trend in fantasy. We've starting to see
Yep.
more of that. There was that
Yep.
Sons of Darkness that came out a while ago, which is based on like, not I don't think Hindu, but Indian philosophy maybe. I could be
Hmm.
mistaken, but
Yep.
I mean, I think it would be and also I think I think it also really shows like fantasy is a diverse thing, and I think fantasy is a very diverse genre, or it should be, and it is.
It is. It is. I mean, I'm just like you. I'm also trying to um, engage with other, fancy works from other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I have Kaikei on my pile by Vaishnavi Patel, which is a retelling of an Indian mythology.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's quite. I mean, I had to return it. Sorry, the library asked for it to be returned, and I did. And by then, after dropping it off, I went straight to put it on hold again so I could get it back. And then they
Yeah, and
call me back the next day to come pick it up.
I mean, it also would have been. It's all. I mean, it's also fun because like in Black Leopard, Red Wolf, there's a lot of stuff that I ended up learning that's actually based on actual mythology. That isn't something he just made up. Like the
Yeah,
Inpundaloo, that's
yeah,
real. Well, not
yep,
real, but it's actual mythology. And I was kind of
yeah,
like, where did
yeah.
they come up with that? And that's
I think
freaky.
I think what Marlin did is similar to what most Western writers do when they write fantasy, which is really to meld different cultures
Hmm.
and different cultures' mythologies. So for instance, for Marlon, he had a predominant South African and South African and Western African mythology.
Hmm.
But you can also find how in some of the other writers, so you have maybe in Game of Thrones some semblance to European
Hmm.
culture slash Middle Eastern cultures as well.
Yeah, definitely. Essos is based on like the Middle East
Yeah,
back in the day.
but in maybe in I mean strongly. I mean you find in maybe someone like Zora. Uh, can't remember what her name is now, and I did a review of one of her books, and it was Zora. She also does a contribution to Star Wars Republic books, but
Hmm.
she has her own books, which are fantasy based on Mexican Latino culture,
Mm.
and she does a meld, and it's quite interesting to find that even when you say Latin American, it's very diverse in
Yeah, no, it's
itself.
different countries and,
Yeah.
and yeah.
So you learn all of this. You learn all of this just by engaging with these different cultures or these different writers from these different cultures and their works. And it's quite interesting to see how we are all similar and yet so different, and so much so beautifully so. I mean, so much beautifully so.
Yeah, I mean, I remember taking a mythology class when I was in college, or well, I mean, I'm still am in college, but in my previous college where I was going to before I transferred the one I'm going now, I took a mythology class. It's really fast. All of them had a flood story, which I thought was really fascinating.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with mythology.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. I
all of
know
it
you know
might.
enough.
I
Yeah,
mean, the only one I would say I'm pretty knowledgeable in is like Norse or Greek.
really. That's interesting. I'll
But
try and research that.
But yeah, no, there's literally like so it makes you think like so was that did that actually happen and they just kind of you know it's
Remembered it differently.
yeah like it's in the Bible, it's in
Yeah, the
um
deluge.
yeah, it's in a bunch of stuff. It was really interesting. I'm like, wow, that's
Interesting.
crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's stuff like that. Just I don't know. It was like, man, that's neat. And I mean, mythology is also a way for us to understand the world, or at least
Yeah.
it was before like science came around. It's like, oh yeah, this happens because of the sun moves. No,
But it never really goes away. Never goes away.
no, it doesn't. And I think that's what fantasy does at its best. It's sort of a modernization of that, or
Yes.
at least it
I
should
agree.
be. There's
I
some
agree.
of it that's not, but there's
I
always good
agree.
and bad books out there.
Oh well. We'll do our best to discern them.
Yeah, I try. I mean, I usually go for books that I would enjoy because I don't go out of my way to search out books I wouldn't like. So at least if I don't like the book, I can go, okay, it was just disappointing. It wasn't like I hated it. I don't know if you've had a similar experience.
I I rarely DNF books.
Mm,
Um so I have to be very sure of myself before I can't always be 100%, but I rarely DNF books. I don't know. I like to, if I have it in my hands, I like to want, or I want to finish it, then make a decision. But as far as discerning which books to review. I only review books that I enjoy.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I only review books that I enjoy. Mm, I think for the reason that if I were to talk about a book I didn't enjoy, I feel my content or my angle would be a little bit polarized, and
Mm.
you don't exactly come to my channel to watch a polarized view. That's not my style.
Mm-hmm.
I I'd rather spread the good cheer, praise good books, praise good writing, take the lessons, share the lessons, and then also I try and apply that to my appreciation for the next good read.
I mean, I suppose what kind of interests me about, like, African mythology, or at least the stuff I've encountered, is like there's a lot of, they really love their trickster archetypes. Like, I mean, I don't know if you've read like the Odyssey, but
I
there's the trickster archetype, and like African
Yes,
mythology is, there's a lot of that.
yes. It's not just, it's also in Nordic mythology.
That's true. Yes.
You have
Loki,
Loki.
Loki is the trickster god after all.
Well, you find in
Excuse me.
quite, yeah, I think I really I sit up for any conversation around mythology. Um, but you find something really similar and interesting about trickster archetypes. They are not they are not inherently bad.
No, I mean, I like the trickster archetype a lot. Oh, hello there.
They are not bad. I mean, so Anansi is not, yeah, you could say Anansi is interesting. I'm not a professional.
Well,
I'm not expert in mythology, but as far as I have read,
mm-hmm.
Anansi is not considered a god. So it's
Oh,
in
he's
that
not.
sense, no,
So
Anansi
I bet
is not.
I don't know if you read American Gods, but like, there's
American
Mr.
gods.
Nancy.
Yeah, so that's a problem. Not a problem, but Anansi is fabula. Anansi is something in African or in West African. Let me be specific. Anansi is actually Ghanaian. Is Ghanaian. He was first Ghanaian before he crossed the ocean, and then was perpetuated in Jamaican, Trinidadian, Caribbean myths or fables. Um,
Kind of sounds like Arthurian a little bit, because I've read. Admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of Arthurian myth, but I've learned, because my friend Raph did a really good video. It's like 4 hours long about
Interesting.
Arthurian. It kind of sounds similar. Like, it was the English, and then the French kind of took it and did their own
Yes,
French stuff to it, and
yes.
sounds like that.
Yeah. So as far as I know about so in the same way, so I think it's so the story of Arthur, I think, is integral to the evolution of the Romantics or Romanticism.
Mm-hmm.
So when it went from England to France at the same time, in the same timeline or trajectory, the definition of romance, which we all know, we all understand romance to be, lovey-dovey,
Well, yeah.
but it wasn't originally so. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I think it was actually a way to describe to describe chivalry, to describe
Mm-hmm.
valor,
Mm-hmm.
before he then crossed to, I think, the French, and then was over time it became something else. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
just it became, it became what we know it now to be, which
Well, I
which
mean, when you were talking about Anansi, it kind of reminded me of that. Was my point.
yeah, yeah. So that those are the part of the ways that it's kind of stories travel.
Mm-hmm.
However, Anansi originally, or in different stories, originally, and still even now, and even when it's crossed over, Um, Anansi sometimes was a tortoise. Anansi sometimes in stories might be a what's it
Spider.
called? A spider. Then we had variations of derivatives of Anansi as bear rabbit in in Southern American stories. So Anansi is not exactly a god, but a
He's a
very
figure. I hear
yes,
you.
he's
So
archetypical.
he's like
He was
Odysseus.
yeah, so he's archetypical, and I think that was the case that Neil Gaiman worked with or based his employment or his lifting or using that archetype in American gods, but
Hmm.
he's not necessarily a god. However, um,
I mean, I
Anansi
wouldn't call John Chapman or Johnny Appleseed, if you've ever heard of that. He's in the book. I wouldn't call him a god. He's just a folkloric figure.
exactly, yeah, that's the Irish, right?
No, he was an American guy. He was like a conservationist before that really became a thing. He was. I
Okay,
mean, I learned about him when I was in school. He's like an It's kind of like Paul
yeah.
Bunyan.
So yeah. So as far as
So
Neil
he became kind of
Gaiman's
a
use of
folkloric figure,
yeah.
and also it's
So
about belief. So
yeah,
that it works.
exactly. Well, exactly. As far as Neil Gaiman's use of gods in that sense might be another way to say archetypes or, like you said, figures, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the trickster archetype very very interesting because it's actually and this now for African mythology. And let me be specific. In Nigeria or Yoruba mythology, we don't have. Oh, sorry, we have who they call Eshu. Now, Eshu is typically, or if you were going to transcribe the word Eshu to English, you would say devil.
Mm.
But Eshu is not the devil. In
Okay.
fact, till today, we have worshippers of Eshu.
So it was like a mistranslation or something like that.
It's a what's it called? Mistranslation means a wrong translation.
Mm.
But it's not it's not a sufficient or adequate, not a correct translation. Let me put it
Okay.
that way. It's not sufficient. You're not describing him sufficiently. He's so much more than that. And the
Mm.
reason for this is that it's very important to say that it's very important to draw the distinction or to clarify that Eshu is not an evil doer. In fact, Eshu has a good side.
Mm-hmm.
But in issue and in different contexts, part of his persona involves being a trickster.
Mm-hmm.
So you see that these archetypes or this the archetype of the trickster is a sub is a trait of a bigger god
Mm-hmm.
who is not necessarily a bad person, and it comes down you know it kind of flows from top to bottom. That's traits that you're not necessarily a bad person. You have a good side as well. You also do some good.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is also also further validated by the similarity between this mythology in African mythology or Yoruba mythology with Nordic mythology,
Mm-hmm.
where you have Loki.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, what people might think and maybe even get a hint of is that from your Marvel movies or Marvel series,
Well, yeah, that's kind of where I first heard about him.
Loki. No, Loki is not inherently a bad person.
Well, no.
He does some good too.
Yeah, Norse mythology is really weird,
Yeah,
is what I've learned.
yeah,
Like, and if you've only familiar with it with the comics, you'll be very stranged out by because Thor and Loki aren't brothers per se, and it's more like Loki and Odin are more related. Though not really. They made like a blood pact, what we would call like a
yeah.
blood pact nowadays.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, but no, it's
And
there's a. I mean, it's also where I think we get existentialism from, because I mean, there's a lot of existential stuff in Norse, because there's this idea that there's fate, you cannot change it, you only can do only thing that matters is what you can do with the time you got. You know, you can't change it, and that's basically what existentialism is. So that's kind of why I find it fascinating.
Hmm.
But
That's yeah. So a lot of similarities across different myths, mythologies, or even geographies. Even the Greek also had. So in the same way that Odin is not a very is not a very gracious character. He's not a gracious father figure. He's not
I
even
wouldn't
the
call him the
perfect,
nicest guy nowadays.
you know. And even in the way that you see, even in the way that he's depicted in American Gods,
Yeah,
yeah, there are bad
he's
guys,
not he's not a nice
but
guy.
he's not exactly the opposite of a bad guy.
No, I mean, we all have good and bad in us, I
Yeah,
think. And it's
exactly.
kind of that way with Odin. I mean,
And
Odin's.
Zeus too. If Zeus too, he has
I
his
think
own
Zeus is
faults.
kind of a jerk, though.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's why I always had a hard time with Greek myths, because it's like, oh man, they're all prima donnas. They're always arguing and going around, and I read some of them. There were these old little like comics. They were kind of like these illustrated books, and I would read those. Um, I mean, I like some of them though. I like the labyrinth, the Minotaur story, and stuff like that. But anyway, get off topic. Um, but yeah, no, but yeah, no, it's really interesting how mythology is kind of how we understand the world. I think fantasy is a modern take on that, but I made a video about this recently, but I've been wondering if fantasy's been in this sort of identity crisis, because
Hmm.
um, I think
Interesting.
it was, but I think we're starting to move away from it per se, because we're seeing these new voices like Marlon James come in, and you see like Sons of Darkness come along. Again, I haven't read that book yet, but so I think we're starting to see different like views on fantasy. That's not necessarily has to be the Tolkien model or the Robert E. Howard model.
Yeah.
Nothing
Yeah.
wrong with those, of course.
Yeah.
I like those writers a lot. It's just
Yeah.
kind of.
I agree. I agree. It's all the more exciting, actually. You know, see how even the retellings. Tolkien wasn't looking to do retellings. He wasn't. He wasn't doing retellings. But we're seeing retellings in these days in a way that still honors the tenets, as it were, of fancy writing, but with a greater sense of responsibility to, you know, mirror the world as we know it.
Hmm.
Or logic and sometimes with science. So it's really interesting time.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's also you kind of have to take into effect. It's kind of his reaction to the world around him as well. Which I mean,
Yeah.
that's every work of literature.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, the good ones anyway. I know there's books out there that are just meant to entertain, and you don't have to look too deeply into it. I mean, I think there is
Yeah.
an art in that as well. But I find the like works like Lord of the Rings are more engaging to me. I don't know about you. Well, you seem to really like Lord of the Rings, so I mean.
I do. I do. Again, you know, for the reason that it's not just nostalgia.
I'm gonna
uh,
make. I've thought about that's funny you mentioned that. It's
yeah.
I saw. I don't know if you watch Matt's fantasy book reviews, but he made a video or he talked about how he thought like Lord of the Rings was like because like and I mean it's fair. It's kind of it's an older style and some modern readers might be like but it's been bugging me when people are like, oh, people just like it because like it's famous and it's nostalgic. And I thought about making a video going, maybe some people do,
Yeah.
but not always. It's gonna be like
Yeah.
a very spicy rant video. I don't know if I'm gonna do it, but because I'm all
You
like,
should.
I
This
might
is.
ruffle some feathers with that one.
I'm going. I'm going. Yeah. Yeah. You should. I'm going to hold you to it. I'll keep bugging you for that
All
video.
right, all right, all
But
right.
I agree. and I agree definitely. But I
Because
think
my view
I,
is no. Now, are there people who like it just for nostalgia? I'm sure there are. I'm not saying that's not the case at all. But I find that's kind of an ignorant thing to say. just
it's
just
not
blanket
it's not
statements like
simple.
that.
No, it's not simple. It's not simple. It's not straightforward either. I mean, like I said, I'm not quite sure that it's nostalgic in that sense. For me, the reason why I like it and why I hold it dearly. But I think for me, okay, so there are a lot of things that J.R. Tolkien does right,
Mm-hmm.
and and he sets a standard for a lot many. I mean, all fantasy writers, and you've mentioned this as well, which is one of which is he thought deeply about his subjects,
Mm-hmm.
right? And each element, each part of the story was well thought out. Magic systems, world building. I mean, don't get me started on the language.
I was about to say the
There
world
is no
building's like
serious.
that's the
How many
big
writers
part.
do you know? Yeah, I'm not talking about writers who are churning out one book a year.
Yeah,
How many writers do you know spend years building a dictionary of a language,
yeah.
right?
And also
Now,
he was just doing it for like his own like interests. Like it wasn't even that
yes,
he was
because
like
that's what. And do you remember the reason he did that was because it was quite an interesting thing to do. I mean, he was trying to replicate what he and his brothers or his children did, and which all children do. I mean, these days I listen to my kids, they try to make up languages,
hmm,
and they make up languages that they understand and they can talk to themselves in. That's what children do. And he did this, and he said, you know what? Even if he was going to write a story for his kids, he might as well just build a system for a language system for his characters to relate in. And he did this quite well. How many writers do you? So we had, every other writer that came after him. I'm sure, you know, there may be at his own time people who tried to do it, but if you're not able to keep up, you just have to give him his flowers. He did the work. He researched those
he
the
was
language
also
system wasn't,
it
you
also
know
probably helped it was his job. He was a professor of like
he was, but
philology.
how many professors do you know actually dedicate time to say, let me create a different language for this story?
Well, not a lot of them.
Exactly. He had a sense of purpose, in this regard, and he demonstrated his ability to actually see things through to the end. He did this, so this is was one way to appreciate the work that J.R. Tolkien did.
hmm
And I'm not just talking about, him being, my first love, or him actually trying to perpetuate this story of fairies, which we all enjoyed as kids, in whatever context. Whether we also have fairy stories in Africa, but and I enjoyed. I grew up on Enid Blyton, reading Enid Blyton, and she also had those fairy stories. We had those stories. We like those stories that are didactic, that teach you, oh, this is why you should never, be mean to old women, or this is why you should always be, nice to strangers. We love them. So when you now encounter J.R. Tolkien and you see that, there is another way to tell the story about fairies and the good that they could do, the way they could come through for you when you're in trouble, you kind of feel that your former joys or your experiences are being elevated, and adds more to the value of the story. Fine. But so it goes beyond the nostalgic. It goes into the longer you hold on to the book, the longer you ruminate on the story itself, you begin to see other ways in which you could actually appreciate the work that J.R. Tolkien did. And that's why I say, to say people actually love it because they are nostalgic about the story, I'm sure there are people who do that, but
hmm
there are other people who go beyond that to also say, there is still so much that we're trying to uncover and we're trying to enjoy in this story, not from first, second read, third read, fourth read. And It's like, dipping your toe in a river and you're never really dipping your toe in the same river twice, you know.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I thought of it like that, but I often like to think in like thematic or like
Yeah.
characterization and stuff like that. Where it's more like it's not just because of nostalgia. Like he covered like trauma
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
moving on,
Oh yeah.
the
Yeah.
world changing. He talked about
Yeah.
that. He talked about
Yeah. Yeah.
how evil is, good and evil. Talked
Yep.
about those. And there's
Yes.
there's a lot of
Yes.
depth in Lord of the Rings that I think a lot
Yep.
of people kind of miss out on. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of a shame.
You gotta share that link with me so I can check it out.
Of what?
The video you just referred to.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll send that to you once we're yeah. I'll send that to you.
Yeah.
Um,
And then do your video, do that video, the response video.
like I'm gonna
Don't
ruffle.
give up. Don't give up. You can do it. You can do it.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna have to think about how I'm gonna do it. So, cause like I don't want to sound like that like angry guy who's just like, man, old things are better. Like I don't want to do that.
Be angry if you gotta be angry. Be you. That's the beauty of BookTube. Everybody
No,
coming in with
it's
their own
it's
personality.
yeah, that's always the fun part.
Yeah.
And I've also had similar discussions with friends about like stuff like Citizen Kane, and I'm just like, it's not just cause it's old, and people say it's good. It's not just cause of that. It's very
Yeah.
frustrating.
True. I agree. I agree. I
Like,
agree.
I'll ask you this real quick. Like, do you think like modern fantasy is like better than older fantasy, or do you think there's not really? Because like I've
No,
heard some people kind of mention that, and I'm like, I don't know
no,
about that.
no. And if they think, and I would, and maybe I should be polarized.
Maybe you should be
Okay.
polarized.
Let me
The
give,
arc the
let
arc
me,
comes full circle. You were like, I'm trying
yes,
not to polarize, and now you're like,
yes. No, no. I'll take this liberty on your channel. Um, that is wrong. Reason is because in the same
well,
way.
I think tastes have changed. I do agree with that. I do think that taste has changed a little bit over time, but
So yeah, there are two ways to look at it. Your taste as a reader is not the same your same taste as a writer,
mm-hmm,
although writers are readers, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, writers. Okay, first of all, then to answer it very directly, to say that modern fantasy writers or modern fantasy is better than old or traditional or or epic or from whatever time before is wrong for the reason that you know even in the even in its function as a reference, even in its function as a reference gives it a level of, I won't say validity, a level of, or a status that you are contradicting yourself in saying is less than what is modern. I don't know if that's, let me try. What I'm trying to say is, even amongst those who say that it's modern fantasy is better than whatever other fantasy they think, you know, they will find that there are works that still measure up to their taste. And always, literature is very subjective. I mean,
Well,
to say
yeah,
something is
people are
better than
different.
another.
That's the thing. It's always kind of
Yeah,
the struggle with something like literature is that like people are different and people like
yeah,
different things.
yeah. I mean, you don't. So and this is why I can't be polarized, because you can't really hold one view over another. Everybody's, I mean, is valid. Some don't like grim dark, or some don't, they don't have an appetite. Like I told you, I confessed for the first time on YouTube that I can't stomach McCarthy. It's not to say McCarthy is a terrible writer, and I can't say that if I haven't even read him. That's another thing. You always have to, um you know
I mean, you
um
got all the pretty horses. I mean, read that, and
yeah, I
if you
guess,
like it, you like it. If you don't, you
exactly.
know.
But I can't say. one one genre or one time is better than another. I think it would be not a delusional. It's just doesn't sound right. Especially knowing that there are people who enjoy one as much as the other, or take something away from one that they can't find in another. It happens. It's the beauty of the community. It's the beauty of reading more works. It's the beauty of embracing and having all these representation, having all these stories being told. So to say one is better than another is to be seclusive. I mean, to seclude or to disenfranchise some people as writers or as readers. I think that's just wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was gonna say I just disagree with it,
Yeah,
but
well, so
I mean, I think
that's
there
my
are great works of modern fantasy. I mean, we've
yeah.
we've been talking about it, but it's I don't think one's necessary. Or even the people who are like, oh, all these old things are better. It's like not
Yeah, yeah,
necessarily. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
now
yeah.
that you could argue that's because of nostalgia if you really wanted to.
Again, yeah, again within nostalgia. That's that's all
It's
right.
yeah, it's oh man, it's a fun world we're in.
Oh yeah, definitely
There's
interesting times. I mean, we're going to see a lot of interesting works coming out this year, and I mean in future, now and in the future. A lot of new ways to tell stories, and we should embrace them. We should embrace them. We shouldn't begin to disenfranchise. Oh, this is better than the other. There are new ways to enjoy old things, and I think that's one of the beauties of reading, of storytelling, and of the community.
indeed. I
Yeah.
mean, for you, is there like a modern fantasy novel where when you think about it, you're like, damn, like that's the peak. It's peak fantasy literature. It's something I've
I
I've kind of debated with myself a little bit for a
hmm.
little while. I would say American Gods, but I don't wanna I don't wanna
Oh well,
spoilers. I really like American Gods a lot. So
I like I like American Gods. I like Neil Gaiman, but I wouldn't say he is the standard for me. I don't know. I don't know that to say you're looking for the standard is right. It sounds really ambitious. Um, I mean, we have so many great writers,
it's true.
even writers from the old who are coming back to retell or expand old stories. So no, I'm going to rephrase that question.
Okay.
Rather, I will answer the question if there are writers of modern fantasy that I enjoy, and I would say yes, definitely. RF Kwan.
Well,
Some
I guess I probably should have. I guess I probably should have asked what are some modern fantasy books or authors you really liked. There you
No, no, no,
go.
you didn't do wrong. You're trying to catch me, but
I just want to know. I'm not trying
I
to.
know, I know, but hey, it's out there. I'm sure that question is being asked out there, and there are probably a few YouTube booktubers doing these videos about, oh, this person is better. I don't know, but anyway, for me, for me, so we have RF Kwan. She's doing. We have NK Jemison. I would still put Octavia Butler in that league. And we have, yeah, definitely Marlon James. Depending on your definition of modern fantasy.
I think
We
he's a
have
fantasy writer. I mean,
Midi
he calls himself a
Okarafo.
fantasy writer, so I mean, I
Yeah,
say
well,
he's
he
fantasy.
he writes. He's entitled to his opinion, and that, as I am to mine.
No, I was saying he says he
um,
writes fantasy, and that's good enough for me.
oh, oh yeah, okay, yeah, sure, that's good. We have Nedi Okorafor, the Binti saga, or trilogy. She has this she has a great story, and she's also on the forefront of a movement of writers writing what we call the African, the Juju subgenre of spec fiction. Um, I think this a few. I do have on my and I do have on my radar a few writers who are also coming up. I mean, we have Sui Okungbowa Davies, who of the Nameless Republic trilogy. I just finished book one. I still have to finish my Tad Williams before I go into book two. Yeah, so many. And one thing that I do love about all of these, in comparison to the forefathers of epic fantasy, is in the way that they use modern material, and modern contexts, modern issues, to write these timeless stories. I would say, very beautiful stories. And on one level, you have the premise which you can relate to or be attracted by, but always when you read or engage these writers, they don't write the same way, whether in the way that they put the words to get string words together to make very lyrical prose, or in the way that they think through their magic systems in a way that is original, or in a way that is engaging, in a way that is convincing. For each of these, I doff my cap to them, because they do quite phenomenal work.
Yeah, I'll have to check those out. I've wanted to check out I can't ever pronounce her name. She did the oh man. It's like Nidia. You mentioned her earlier, Nidia
Nedio
Kodavori.
Craft.
Yeah, I've wanted to try her for a long time. I just haven't gotten
Oh, you
around.
should. You should.
Haven't gotten around to it yet, as you do. Um, it's always expanding. One I really want to try is Ursula K. Le Guin. I've always wanted to try her. I never.
Oh yeah, Left Hand of Darkness and Etsy, Children of yeah, Etsy, yeah. Yeah, I'd definitely like to read her someday. I haven't gotten around to.
Yeah, maybe we can like do like Earthsea or something as like a buddy read. I don't know if you
Hey
do
man,
those.
say the word. Let me know when.
Yeah, no, there's like this big Earth Sea volume, and it
Yes,
has illustrations from Charles Vess. I really want to get that, like, cause,
nice,
uh,
nice.
but
You send me a link when you're ready to body read.
I will. Yeah, I do hate to cut this short though. This has been great. I do have other things to do today. I'm sure you do as well, because I heard your kids
Yes,
earlier. But thank you so much for coming on, Mr. Azu. This was a really wonderful conversation.
I enjoyed it, every bit
Vigorous as I enjoy them.
of it.
As I like to do before the end of these, if you have any social media or anything you want to share before we hop off, feel free.
Oh well, it's quite very simple. Sochi Azuh everywhere. Not no, not quite everywhere. Sochi Azuh on YouTube, on Instagram, and my website is sochiazu.com.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I definitely did. I hope you enjoyed this conversation.
I did very much.
Um, all right. Until next time, I will. Definitely need to do this again at some point.
Oh, please let me know when.
All right.
Thanks, Britton.
All right.